So welcome to Climate Conversation. We're going to talk about renewable energy and energy reduction this evening, and really appreciate your joining us. So we'll do the usual format of I've got some things to talk about. First half focusing more on reducing energy usage, and then the second half, so that maybe shorter, and then the second half looking at renewable energy and some of the options in there, and different ways that you can do it regardless of where you are. So if that works, we'll start with land acknowledgement. St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people who are still here. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. And prayer to begin. Lord, show us how to do things well today. Show us how to make our contribution as we change the way we live and travel, make and consume, distribute and sell, use and reuse energy and products. Show us how to do simple things well in our home, places of work, and daily lives. Show us how to protect the world you made in all its diversity and goodness, from carbon emissions, global warming, and climate change, rising temperatures and sea levels, the displacement of people, environmental poverty, harm, and destruction. Show us how and why, so that alone and with others, our contribution will make a difference. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to start with sort of a framework looking at energy overall, and why we have some issues around it, and then look at more where is energy used in our lives, and it's looking at it fairly broadly. On a global basis, global greenhouse gas emissions have started to grow. They dropped during the pandemic, and if we look at sort of the sources of emissions, a lot of it is from energy with fossil fuel usage. Most of that is carbon dioxide emissions, but there's also a lot of methane and nitrous oxide and fluorinated gases. And the sources of it, as we think about it, are a lot of it's electricity and heat. And that's just, around the world, people are keeping warm or keeping cool. A fair amount is used in industry. And that's all the manufacturing, whether it's the devices we use or the steel that goes into buildings or anything else that's manufactured. Transport, a lot of that is cars. In certain parts of the world, India, Vietnam, it's two-wheelers, motorbikes. And then the planes that we fly in, trains, all the different types of transport. And then buildings are a big part of it. So there are a lot of different diagrams of what's where in there. But those are some of the issues around energy and where energy is used. If we nail it down or bring it down to our own house and look at it, because that's where we can probably have the greatest impact most easily. Sometimes we can have impact at the office that we work in, the company we work in, the church we go to, the community organization we volunteer with, or other places, but home is very personal. The average home in the US uses about 10.6 kilowatt hours per year. In Washington, we actually use more, which is sort of interesting to me. It's slightly more. So it's about almost 12,000 per year. And what do we use that for? A lot of it goes in. There are different diagrams on this and different analyses, but this is sort of, so if we think about it in our houses, a lot of it goes to heating. And that goes from, depending on how comfortable you are, around October on through May and June, depending on the year. Cooling, we didn't really have in Seattle until recently, but it's become more of an issue. So this is more nationwide. There's a lot that goes into cooling. A lot goes in the water heater, and we can do some things to manage the water heater. And then it gets to smaller things. Refrigerators are a big part of it. Dryers are a big part of it. But it's just sort of interesting to look at where we use energy. And we sort of know that all these devices are on, but often don't think about it and how that relates into what we can do. So the conundrum that we have is that on the emissions related to energy are for things that we need. It's agriculture for food because the farmers will use it for tractors, the transporters will take the crops and meat to market. It'll get to the supermarket. Supermarket uses energy. That whole section, we're not going to go without food, obviously. Transport for work and family, we can take bicycles, we can walk, but walking to downtown or walking to where you're going on vacation or even bicycling is pretty tough to do. So we're going to have transport. And then all the trucks that are carrying things to us is also the transport side. The items we use, whether it's the furniture we have or the refrigerator we have or the stove we use for cooking or whatever it may be, all the office equipment that we have, all the devices and items in the church and wherever else, those are all made by industry. And then the buildings with the heating and cooling, keeping us warm, keeping us cold is a big part of it. So all those different things use energy. And they're things that we're need in our lives, and we're really not going to get away with do away with them, but we can perhaps change what they do. And more, there is more renewable energy that's being used. If we look at sort of these biblical references on it, there's relatively little that relates directly to energy. And so I looked at it from sort of a different perspective of what are we doing to take care of the earth overall, and how does this relate into our usage of energy? So you shall not, Numbers, you shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. And the way I look at that as relating in is that, what we do causes emissions. And so if we're going to avoid defiling the land, we need to figure out how we reduce emissions in our lives so that we're not defiling the land and the air. Proverbs, whoever is righteous has regard for the life of his beast. Beast was sort of the transport of the day. And so we're taking care of the things, whether it's transport or others that we use in our lives. And do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. If we think of it, and I'm guilty of it as well, is think of all the energy we waste in some ways. We leave lights on, we leave the heating on during the day while we're not at home. We drive to places that are relatively close, or we take multiple trips. There are all kinds of things we do that you can look at and say they're sort of unnecessary. So it's something to look at in terms of how we live our lives. So if we look at sort of things we can do to be more eco-friendly energy-wise, one is to reduce energy usage. We're going to be talking about solar panels and wind power and geothermal for home use. And if we're putting in solar panels or wind or whatever we're doing, it all revolves around how much energy we're using. So we need to start out by reducing that energy usage. And the same for companies, the same for nonprofits. It's all reducing energy first, and then we don't need to install as many solar panels or as much renewable energy. And then we can use renewables in a variety of ways because they're more eco-friendly. And we do need to store the energy if it comes from wind or solar, because wind doesn't always blow, solar it's dark part of the time, so energy storage is something we'll look at as well. The table on the right I put in, just in terms, and the headline is from the New York Times, that America is running out of power. For a long time, the energy usage was sort of flat, and now it's just spiking upwards with data centers and AI and cryptocurrency and more devices and a lack of transmission lines. There's solutions around, but putting in a new transmission line to carry energy from, let's say, a wind farm in Wyoming to PSE in our area is going to take 10 to 15 years to get all the permits and then install it and everything. So we've got a conundrum in here of what we're going to do. So if we start out with that first part of looking at how can we reduce the energy we use, where do we use energy? At home, we saw the circle of the places we use it. So heating, cooling, lighting, refrigerator, dryers, are some of the big things in our home. On transport, we're using it with our, cars or pickups or whatever we drive around in. We can look at how do we change that? How do we reduce the number of trips we take? How do we combine trips? And do we take public transport at least part of the time? Can we consider an electric vehicle, an EV, or are we using an internal combustion engine vehicle that's still using gasoline? In the office, we can work on energy and consumption reduction plan. If we're working in offices or if we're volunteering somewhere, we can be part of that as well. The food we eat also has an impact. And if we are choosing food that's more local, so it's not shipped in from South Africa or Mexico or Europe or something like that. Washington has wonderful wine. We don't always need French wine. I've got a bias. And so that's part of it, buying things in season, and then plant-based. I'm vegetarian. I realize most people are not, but we can reduce the amount of meat we eat and do more plant-based, more vegetables and fruits in our meals. And a big part of it is also reducing food waste. About 30% of food is wasted, whether it's thrown away after our meals or it's food that's in the refrigerator and goes bad. So reducing that waste is part of it. And then with the purchases we make, it's reduce the amount we buy, reuse things, and recycle. So a lot of ways to reduce energy. So what can we do at home? Electrification is a part of it because then we're using energy that does not come from fossil fuels for the most part. Those of us who are in Seattle are something like 85 or 90% hydropower. So most of our energy is from renewable sources, but energy usage is going up. Number of dams is not going up. And so there's likely to be more energy generated by fossil fuels. And so that makes solar or wind or geothermal even more important to us to meet the need. But home electrification is going to use those renewable energy sources. We can start by doing a home energy audit to see what's done. We can do that on our own. There's sources for that, or we can get some help on it and figure out where we're actually using energy. Installing a heat pump rather than using a gas or oil furnace makes a big difference. It reduces energy usage tremendously. Smart power strips can also be a benefit because then we can turn devices on and off more easily. So that, and we can do it remotely as well. Smart thermostats make a big difference. We installed one finally instead of the one that had been around for decades. And along with making sure it's a bit warmer in the morning when we wake up in the winter, it does mean that it's easier to turn off energy during the day, and I'm not going to forget to turn off the heat during the winter or turn off other things. So it makes a big difference. Lowering the temperature of water in our water heater or using a heat pump water heater are ways to do it. Insulating our house and weatherizing it, which means a lot of the wastage comes through the windows. And their drafts, windows settle over time, so reducing that. Washing clothes in cold water and air drying them is a very simple thing. And then sort of interesting, how much energy internet usage alone is. But the average person uses the internet for about 3,200 hours a year. That's a lot of hours, whether it's the streaming or surfing or messaging or whatever else. And it's about 3 or 4% of our total energy usage. So that's something to look at as well of what can we do differently. So I want to start with that. And we're going to take a short break and for discussion. But then we'll go on and look at renewable energy. And we're going to be looking at a lot of different sources of it. Solar energy we'll spend some time on. And whether you live in a house or an apartment, there are ways to do solar energy. And regardless of where you are as well. Wind energy, we don't really think of, but there are small wind energy devices now. They're about 3 feet high. I mean, you can get the big ones. And there's some great photos around Seattle of the ones that are 15 or 20 feet high in people's backyards. But there are smaller ones also. Geothermal is a possibility. It's drilling down into the ground because there's heat as you go down further, and depends on how far down you go. Biomass is a possibility, not so much in our homes, but the anaerobic digesters that are using agricultural waste or waste from animals to create electricity is another one. And then there's ocean power, hydropower, nuclear fusion is a ways away, but potentially coming in. Nuclear fission is here. And so that's another one. There's a lot of debate around it, but it's a possibility. What's sort of interesting is just to look at numbers for the US and numbers globally. Globally, about 5.5% of energy is renewable. In the US, it's already up to about 25%. And the global number, when we think about it as the US is doing reasonably well, China is really moving ahead on renewable energy, Europe is moving ahead, but then you've got a lot of people in India, other parts of South Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, that are probably not moving along quite as fast, understandably. And so on a global basis, it's still a relatively smaller percentage, but that 25% just amazes me that it's actually up that high. Part of that is the hydropower, like in Washington State. Part of it is Texas is the one that also surprises me with solar power and some wind power. That the percentage it's like number one or number two in the U.S. in terms of percentages. So yeah, absolutely amazing in terms of where it's gone. So that's sort of a framework for looking at renewable energy. We'll talk specifically about renewable energy in the second part of the conversation, but I wanted to stop for a little while and get some thoughts on energy usage, energy reduction, ideas that people have, and thoughts on what we might be able to do.
Richard?
Yes.
This is Carolyn. What you were saying about storage made
Yes.
me think, is there a way that I just in my home can store energy? I know, I think
Yes.
well, you answer that, would you please?
Yeah, there are two ways, and I'll show you sort of both of them in the next section.
Oh, okay.
And spoilers, there's well, there are actually three ways at least you can do it. And there's the more expensive ways, and there are some less expensive ways and different ways and stuff that's a little bit in the future. But yes, there are definitely ways you can store it easily.
And thanks for the reminder about power strips, because I know
Absolutely.
there's a drainage that occurs from all these electrical gadgets that we have plugged into.
Even when we're not using them, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I appreciate being reminded too, because if there's one quick thing I could do is, set that up in my home tomorrow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then Carol, maybe I could reach it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was cooking during part of this. Was it mentioned what is happening in California?
On with solar or something else?
Oh, California has a total demand of about 30 gigawatt hours per day, and they have installed about 10 gigawatt hours of battery storage, and they're about to install 5 more gigawatt hours of storage this year, which is to say 1/6 of the total demand of California is being installed in 1 year. That is huge, and points to California going all electric very quickly because they have enough batteries to store, so they could have virtually unlimited solar. They've got batteries to store it. And it's forcing out all of the other providers of power because they can't compete. Solar and battery combined is about half the cost of anything else, and in some cases, multiples lower. And that's spreading to Texas, which needs to double their power grid roughly in a decade or less. They're going to do it with batteries and solar. Because if you put battery arrays on both ends of a transmission line, you can get roughly 2 to 3 times as much power through it because you ship it at night.
Nice. No, I did not include that, and it's really good news. And we'll see what happens in Washington. I mean, Seattle is different than other parts, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in Washington State as well.
The peculiar thing is we ship a lot of power from the dams in the
Yes.
east to California. At the
Yes.
point they don't need that power, we're going to have a surplus. The Grand Coulee Dam is essentially a gigantic battery because you
Yep.
only let water out of it when you want to.
Yep.
There are some policy issues there too. Like I've been in meetings where people have pointed out that the what we pay to get solar from California is a lot higher than what they pay to get hydro from us. So the
Yeah, but some of
disconnecting
those
with
agreements were based on a shortage or a surplus. And during the summer, if solar in Washington should be easy, and during the winter you get a lot of rainfall over the Columbia dams, you're going to get a lot of hydro. So it's
yes, but the tariffs aren't balanced. And there are people in the
they're
Washington delegation who are
Well, it's
trying
sort
to
of
get that
beyond
changed.
us in the sense here, but yeah, something
Yeah.
to look at.
But in the case of the U.S. grid electrifying much faster than anybody thought, it's happening. And they're electrifying it with these shipping containers full of batteries, which are on the individual battery, it's about 1/10 what you can build inside your house.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about storage for solar or wind or any other kind of power, I highly recommend looking at what's going on the grid, because I think the grid is going to solve it at about a fraction of the cost that we could solve it ourselves.
Mhm.
Something to look at, definitely. I think we can still do things in the meantime, but something to look at over time, absolutely. Yeah.
Richard,
Yeah.
I was just going to mention something. When I moved into my current house many years ago now, I had two 50-gallon water tanks, which were being heated, quite a bit of the time so that there would be hot water.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I started looking at that just before one of them split down the back. So saved myself from flooding my lower level. But what I put in was an on-demand system. Now, I realize that does use, in my house, natural gas to operate, but at least I'm not keeping water hot
Yep.
for much of the day. So I've been very pleased that my electrical bill is going down some.
Fantastic idea.
Do you have any recommendations when I go out and look for power strips? What should I look for? Is there something tricky about better or worse in power stripping?
Good question. Mm.
Richard, do you have ideas?
Actually, no, I don't have any smart power strips.
But just
Sorry.
now you said a smart power strip. Maybe I don't know. I don't
No.
know the difference between a power strip and a smart power strip. Oh, because I could control it remotely.
Control it remotely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I haven't looked either very much. I've got a couple around, but I don't have a particular recommendation on it.
Yeah. There
Yeah.
was another big innovation in heat pump, particularly hot water heat pumps. They're using this multi-stage technology where a single stage heat pump is what's historically been installed in the Northwest. And you'll notice during the winter, it makes kind of a ruh sound. It's a resonance. Multi-stage are essentially like 3 steps. And so they claim it can go from minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit and still retain the high efficiencies you get in a heat pump. Because if you go below what a single stage heat pump is thing, it is no better than a space heater or an air conditioner.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
so the
Good.
technology has really changed in the last year, and it's worth looking at what you have and what you might have.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to move on and look at the sources of renewable energy and some of the things to do, and that may lead to more conversations as well. So why don't we move along and take a look at some of the options that we have. So first thing I'll look at is solar panels, and we can talk about this in the end and some different things that we can do. But if we're looking at home solar panels, which are obviously different than what utilities are putting in or companies are putting in on the rooftops, But on the home solar panels, and other ones as well, solar panels last about 25 years. We need to make sure that they're suitable, so that you've got the roof that is correct for it and enough sunshine. What's interesting, our neighbor across the street was looking at it and said, we don't have enough sunshine, but the solar panels have improved efficiency enough that once you looked at it more recently, there was enough sunshine to get power. So he's putting them in, which he could not do 5 to 10 years ago. So when we're considering putting in solar panels, we need to figure out how much energy we actually need. The average home is using about 7.1 kilowatt hours. And then you can calculate the number of panels that you actually need. And the installers can help you do that. One of the advantages of solar is that there's a solar incentive from the US government of about 30%. In Washington State, there's no sales tax on solar panels, and there's some grants available as well, depending on income levels and other considerations. And so the break-even point is somewhere around 16 years in Washington State. In other places, it's around 8 to 10 years. It's longer just because we've got lower electricity costs in parts of the state and less sunshine. The average installation costs about $15,000, but it depends on how many panels you put in, what you're putting in, how you do it. So if you're going to put solar in, first thing to do is talk to an installer, get reputable installers. Solar Washington has some on its website. I'm involved in Solar Washington, so just let you know potential conflict of interest there. But there are other ones you can look at as well. You can ask the installers to analyze how much you need, get at least 2 or 3 proposals, read through them carefully, figure out what you're going to do, and then select the installer. There are some less than reputable installers. You need to read the contract, even though it's like 15 to 18 pages, something like that, to make sure you're not going to be stuck paying for something for a long, long period of time that doesn't make any sense. So once you've selected a reputable installer, you can go ahead and install. If you have enough money to pay for it, great. If you don't, you can still get loans, and these can be relatively long-term loans. And they come through credit unions, they come through some banks. There are other organizations that can provide loans as well, and they're relatively long-term loans. And it can help out substantially. Again, there are some grants depending on a variety of conditions. The solar panels get installed, and then you can manage them. There's often a dashboard for it. The one on the right-hand side is our dashboard. The top box is for May, so we're actually producing more than we use. In April, the second box down, we produced less than we use. So summertime is wonderful if you have solar panels as it gets warmer, and these numbers will get even better as we go through the summer. So that's a way to put in the solar panel. A lot, we can talk a lot about that. If you are in a condo or an apartment or don't have a house that you can put it in, there are still options. One is that there are some apartments or condos that have installed solar panels. It may not cover all of the energy for the place, but it can cover part of it. You can also buy renewable energy from the utility. So on the right-hand side, there's the ad from PSE. Not recommending them, but it's what you do, but it is an option in there, so you can get green power. And there is a cost on doing that, so there's an extra cost. So it's the balance between, what do you want to do, but there's a way to do it, and have the option of using the renewable power, even if you're in an apartment building, depending on, again, on where you are. There is community solar in some places, not so much now in Seattle, but in other parts of the state. About 10 or 12 years ago, the Seattle City Light was putting a solar installation in somewhere around the zoo. And you could help finance that and then get a rebate on your power for the next 6 or 8 years. So we did that as well. And then if those are not options, you can still invest in solar through the investment portfolio you have. There are a number of stocks in solar companies, which is an option. There are startups doing things around solar power. So if you're a higher risk investor, you could invest in startups. You could put money into loans that are used to provide solar. So that will give you some kind of return. So a lot of different options around solar. There are solar water heaters around also. And essentially what they do is they use the sun to heat up the water. And there can be solar storage tanks, whether it's on your roof, or I guess Carolyn had them in the backyard or somewhere around before she put in the instant ones. But there are a variety of ways that these will work. And the water gets warmed in the storage tanks, and then can be used inside the house. So it can be another way to use renewable energy for water, and that can replace part or all of the water heater that you have somewhere in your house. Wind energy is also a possibility. It depends on whether you have the space for it in your yard and where you are. But it's becoming much more feasible. So, wind is all over the place. There are federal incentives for installation of wind power, just like there is for solar. And the device on the right-hand side is from a company called Flow Turbines. And it's sort of like 3-foot wind turbine. So they've got them, up from between 3 and about 30 feet high. But you can put one of these in and it will generate a small amount of power. The larger it is, the more it generates. So the table that's there is designed to show just how much power is generated depending on how large the wind turbine is. And what you put in, whether you put it in is a lot of considerations go into that, but I just mentioned because it's something we often don't think about, but it's become more of an option than it was in the past. So the vertical wind turbines start at very low speeds and capture wind from any direction. And there's a cost on installing them, obviously, but relatively lower cost. So if you want to, there are wind energy installers around the Seattle area. So you can ask them to come in, take a look at whether it's going to be feasible. They can do the analysis on it, send you a proposal, and install it. Similar to the process for installing solar. Get several bids, be very careful in what you do, read the contract, but solar is a possibility as well. The challenge that we talked about is that there's not constant solar at nighttime. There's not constant wind, so storage is needed. So one option is to install a battery. This is an example from Enphase. There are installed batteries that you can use. And they will, when you pair that with your solar panel, then you can store the power that you have. One thing I had not realized until there was a scheduled power outage in our neighborhood, that if you have solar panels and the electricity is turned off for a while, because the utility is going to repair in your neighborhood or something else, your solar panels do not provide power. It shuts off. And the reason is that they don't want power going back into the grid and electrocuting the technicians who are working on the lines in your neighborhood. A solar battery, the battery linked up with your solar panels can overcome that, so you get constant power. And something to consider. But batteries are fairly expensive, somewhere between $12,000 to $22,000, depending on how many batteries, how much, what you put in, who, how, all that kind of thing. So it can be fairly costly to do. But there are other solutions that are on the way. And there are different types of batteries that are coming in. So to answer one question, one option is portable large-scale batteries. So this is Jackery. I've not used it. I've seen it advertised, and it's been in some newsletters. But it has a relatively large amount of power, and you can do them in arrays so that you'll have more power and essentially plug things into it. And so that can be very easy way of storing power so that you have power for a power outage. And you can also connect it to a solar panel so that it will recharge. So if you expected a longer outage, you can still get power during that longer outage. So it's something that sort of is portable. You can have a couple of them around the house, and that's one option for you. And eventually, electric vehicles will be able to charge your house as well and charge, other things also. There are a few apparently in the US, but very, very few that you can plug into your house, and it needs to be configured. But that is going to become more common. So the typical EV, electric vehicle, is storing about 67 kilowatts. I think the Jackery ones are somewhere between 2 and 10, so much less. But EVs store a lot of power, and that can be several days worth of electricity for your house. So coming soon, that's another way to do things with using electric vehicles. Geothermal energy basically drills down into the core of the earth, not all the way to the core, obviously, but as you go down, there is heat that's coming from the center of the earth. Naturally occurring heat is there. And so that can be used with geothermal heat pumps for heating and cooling your house or your home. And so that's a possibility. It is not very common at this point. There are a few companies that will install it. Interesting, Washington State Department of Natural Resources has the quote at the bottom, geothermal will play a vital role in a sustainable energy future for Washington State. So they're looking at it longer term, over probably decades, but they're saying it is a possibility within our state. You can put it in your backyard as well and drill down anywhere from 30 to 50 feet to 300 feet, depending on where you are, what's evaluated for your home. So that's an option as well that we don't always think of. And essentially you have a device like this one, which is from a company in the Seattle area. Ground temperature is between 50 and 60 year round. You can get a device like this with the ground heat exchanger and essentially a heat pump, and that links into your ductwork in your home. And you can use the geothermal to keep your home hotter or cooler. And it can reduce your energy costs substantially. For all of this, as I've been mentioning as we've gone along, there are a lot of incentives in place. And so the Inflation Reduction Act gives a lot of credits for energy efficiency, along with solar panels and wind panels and geothermal and batteries, which you can get significant rebates on. There are rebates for some other devices in your home. There's rebates on insulation for houses, a whole variety of things. For electric vehicles as well, which use energy for charging, of course, there are credits for new cars as well as used cars that are significant. So there's a lot of subsidies in there. It's still expensive. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it makes a significant difference. And then the Washington State has the sales tax exemption. There are some programs for lower income families or individuals that are coming in. I think those are supposed to be announced within the next month or so by the Department of Commerce, because there's a grant from the US government that's part of the IRA that's going to finance some of the installations within Washington State. And again, there are grants available, there are loans available that I mentioned earlier. So even though it can be costly, it can be more feasible than many people might think. So I realize that's fairly quick tour through the options that are available. But what I wanted to do is simply to leave more time for question and answers. And Thor has done this. I know Richard Wesley's done a bunch and looked at it. I've done a little bit. And so happy to bounce ideas around, talk about it. Suggestions are welcome and questions are welcome.
I just put a solar and battery system in, and I threw the images of the dashboards into the chat if anyone's interested.
Ah, nice. Thank you. I'll pull the chat up and take a look at that now.
So I think the slides are wonderful, and I really appreciate it. And I see that this is being recorded, and are we allowed to come back and view this and share this with other members of our family?
As much as you would like, as often as you would like.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and can we get the slides? I did a couple of print
Yes.
screen. We can get the slides too as part of that, so if you share it in a different way. Thank you very much. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
So on the St. Mark's website, we've got the recording of the climate conversations and then the slide deck from the climate conversations. So for other ones as well, they're all there. This one will be up. It usually takes about a week to get everything up, but it should be up fairly soon. The conversation last month on farming and agriculture and backyard gardens is up as well. That one was fascinating because we had the farmer in who was talking, Tyler, and he had some books in there with suggestions on what books to use to do various types of farming, which I've got those. I'll get them fairly soon. Anyway, so yes, it'll be up, and feel free to share the link as much as you would like.
Thank
Uh,
you.
That's
Richard-
what I'm hoping as well.
Richard, these are under justice, under creation care.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I have seen the single little solar panels out near mailboxes in rural counties like Island. You know,
Mhm.
and so before we leap into getting solar panels for our electric house, is there a way that we can direct, start with 1 or 2 panels someplace in our house and direct it toward certain uses, like the dryer or something, the washer dryer? I
Good
don't understand.
question, Carol. Oof, that. Yeah.
I think that's fairly difficult to do.
Mm.
I mean, you could do it, but what generally happens is installing the solar panels and the inverters and getting the electrical panels set up and all of that is there's a fairly large cost on that.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
solar panels, in a sense, are a small part of it. So if you put in 2 or you put in 50, now there's a little difference in installation cost, but it's still going to be costly. So generally,
Yeah,
you would do something larger. Richard, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, panels are pretty cheap. Also, if you're in Seattle, we have net metering, so it doesn't really make sense to like put in a panel and direct it at your dryer. You should just create electricity, and if you're using more at home, then it's less you take from the grid. And if you look at my the second image I put up there, you can see what my system looks like. You've got the grid at the bottom, you've got the solar panels at the top. That was like now, so it's getting towards evening. And it's just, which way does it go? And in some jurisdictions, you actually don't get paid as much for putting energy back on the grid. But here, you're just basically using Grand Coulee as a big storage battery, so you don't have to have one of your own.
Yeah. One of the things we did, directing it to particular appliances is usually pretty tough. But what we did, we've got the solar panels that power the whole house. But the battery is set up so that if there's an outage, the battery is a certain size. We've got heat, refrigerator, and electrical in one room so that we have internet, electricity, can plug in the microwave. So that's directed in terms, because there's some stuff that we don't need as much. And so we'll have the battery will power the house for longer. And we said, what's most important? So we do that with the battery, but not with the solar panels themselves. Thor?
Yeah. It's important to check if you own an electric car, to check with the dealer before you plug it in to power your house in an outage,
Yeah.
because almost all of them will tell you it voids your warranty.
Yes, and there's not a lot of cars that'll do it. I mean, Leafs will, because the Japanese standard was bidirectional, but Leafs are also don't charge very fast.
Well, you risk damaging the battery.
Yeah, that whole power your house from your car, I think, is going to be a big uphill slog.
Well, no, I mean, the cost of a battery unit is less, and it is designed to do what you require of it.
Yeah.
But I've been in a number of conversations where people suggested battery capacity was in electric vehicles, but that's before the rise of really cheap lithium iron phosphate and sodium ion batteries, which are flooding the market right now.
Yeah.
And the latest discovery is they take essentially half of a lithium iron phosphate battery and put it in dilute brine that has lithium and sodium in it, and it preferentially soaks up the lithium if they run a charge through it. And so the supply of lithium could explode from this, and the cost would plummet.
Mhm.
So you just got to understand that there's a lot of room for battery prices and availability to move around. But the
Yeah.
idea that you would use an EV battery, my gosh, you got to be rich to think that way.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the cars are sort of being designed for that, or, you know, there are plans to design for that, let's say 3 years out, 5 years out. At that point, you know, I can't speculate in the future. You may be right, Thor. It may
Yeah.
not, still may not be worth it. But
Things are
it's
changing too
one
fast.
of those, not now, but, you know, maybe in the future. And maybe not, we'll know in 3 to 5 years. Carol, Gates, yeah.
Yeah, my husband is here, Ron, this time. We,
Great.
we are renting, and we have Seattle City Lights. So what do you know about what we could do?
Relatively little, but Seattle City Light is mostly hydropower at this point. So it's mostly renewable energy anyway. And so there are a couple things. You know, one is that if you want the storage, you can buy one of those storage batteries. So that would be the storage side of it for a power outage. Not that you would expect that. On the solar side itself, probably relatively little. I know PSE has some options in there. I don't think Seattle City Light does for renewable energy, just because most of theirs is already renewable energy anyway. So probably less there. But the other thing you can look at is, what do you do to support solar? And it can be, you know, the investments and things like that are another way to do it. You know, whether you have $100 or $100 million, you can still support solar that way.
Before I put the system we have in now, we have a sump pump that we were told you need to have this, you know, powered at all times in case your so to keep your basement from flooding. So I went out and got a generator, and then I realized that I couldn't run the generator to power it. So I went and got a battery of one of the kinds that Richard was talking about. And, you know, so you can have those for resiliency in case of power outages. The one I got has like USB charging ports on it, as well as a couple of outlets. So you could use that to like run your refrigerator so your food doesn't spoil and things like that.
Yeah, at this point in Seattle, we don't have power outages like happen in the Midwest. So we've lived here going on 7 years, and there was one power outage where we lived before, and it was a single tree that knocked out just a few of us over there, you know, so it doesn't happen.
There are a lot less. We had 2 in our neighborhood in the past year. Didn't hit our house, but it hit our neighbors. So, and it was like 8 or 12 hours, something like that, not the 3 days in Texas type of thing, but it's getting a little more common. Yeah, but the other thing is there are smaller heat pumps that you can use in apartments. So, you know, if you wanted to look at the reduction side, that could be something to look at as well.
Yeah, there's
So-
a company called Gradient that makes a nice one that sort of sits in a window, but it's U-shaped, so it doesn't push the window out. And it works in both directions. It's a heat pump. Disclosure, I'm invested in the company, but yeah.
Yeah,
Is
and go ahead.
Is that for cooling also? Are you talking about?
Yes,
Mhm.
it does. It's a
Cool.
heat
What's the
pump.
name of your company?
It's not my company.
Or your
It's
investment?
called Gradient.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
you
not
said that. Gradient.
sure if they're selling in Washington yet. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff which is not being sold in Washington yet. You were asking about how can you store heat in your house, Carolyn, and there's another company called Harvest Thermal which is doing that, but they haven't gotten up here yet, although they're getting close, I gather.
Yeah, you could give a presentation about once a week and all the cool things that are happening out there. I posted a link to the Physics News article about the lithium extraction.
Oh, thank you.
It's again, what's forecast is that as renewables and batteries get installed, the price will go down.
Mhm.
But the price of fossil fuel like natural gas will rise because as people have fewer connections to it, the cost of maintaining the system will rise. So
Yeah.
you're getting into these two. We've reached the point where the two are intersecting, and fossil fuel will continue to rise, and electricity will continue to fall.
I guess my question is, for example, with solar, at what point is it worth investing as an individual in solar as opposed to a more centralized solution?
Yeah,
So, we're in the, we've gotten a quote for solar panels and changing our electrical panel and adding an EV charger and all those things. But the solar is only going to cover about 30% of our usage. Is it worth an investment of that size given that kind of coverage, or would we be better putting that money into the heat pump and the EV and let the power company solve the solar problem?
That's another really good question, Nancy.
the general consensus is, at least on batteries, that utility scale is much more efficient than what I put in my house. I just do this stuff, and so I wanted to have a nerd toy, right?
Yeah.
Or just see what it's like. Solar panels, I don't know. It seems like it's the sort of thing that we've got problems where the solar is generated is not the same as where it's used, and there's all of this stuff about transmission lines. So producing it seems reasonable to me, but it's hard to say because you don't really know how the system is going to evolve over the next couple of years. It was easy for me, but I can see it being a more difficult thing for other
And-
people. But in terms of
the
what
other
we
thing-
did, we started with an EV, then we got a heat pump, and the solar stuff was last. So I'd start with an EV, really.
Now, the other thing to look at on it is, the break even on solar panels is something now around 15, 16 years. But there's a study I just saw today, and there's been other ones, that the value of your home goes up when you have solar on it. So that can be a benefit in there. What's interesting to me also is that we put in solar in 2018. Our neighbors put in solar last year, and their panels generate about twice as much per panel as ours. So panels are becoming much more effective than they were in the past, and prices are going down. The incentives are in place for, I think it's up till 2032, assuming they don't get reversed after the next election.
Right.
So that's something to look at as well, because that incentive to put it in is quite large. And so that can offset the cost quite a bit. So you're right, it's a complicated
Right.
decision there, but
There's-
those are some perspectives on sort of the financials on it.
And there are incentives for the solar, but not if you don't do the solar. So at least where I live.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's something I wanted to ask about, Richard. When we put ours in, they said that there wasn't a federal credit unless you put battery in as well. And I thought the point of all of this was they're trying to make the grid more resilient. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, IRA came in last year, so it depends
Yeah.
on when you put it in. Because
Well, 2
My
months ago.
understanding is that now you would not need to put in battery in order to get the credit.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. We're sort of getting up to the end of time. So what I'm going to do is close this out with.
I hope not in a cosmic sense.
Not in the cosmic sense. No. I'll close out our discussion. Let me clarify that. Didn't mean I'd have anyone panic. And I'll stay on for a while, and I'm happy to chat, but just to make sure that we're sticking to our time. So in case other people have things to go off to. So Just a couple things to close with. I always try to find some interesting quotes, but you go back to Thomas Edison. I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy, and that's, he died in 1931. And then Thoreau in the 1800s was looking at wind power. So it's just interesting to go back and find some of those quotes. They're sort of fun for me. And then Al Gore obviously is out promoting renewable energy and less reliance on carbon-based fuels. And so that's something that's going on as well. So just sort of fun stuff to look at along the way. But let me close this out with a prayer. Lord, we thank you for the gift of creation and ask for your forgiveness. We are responsible for the environmental degradation that we are experiencing. As we undergo an ecological conversion, we ask that this pain transitions to hope as we endeavor to find new ways to rectify our transgressions. We pray for a just transition from fossil fuels to more sustainable energy sources, a better future whereby our biosphere, nature, and humanity are at the center of the energy transition. We ask that those in positions of authority, power, and wealth shoulder their grave responsibilities and recognize the consequences their actions have. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks all for joining us. I'll stay on for a while. Like I said, if you have more questions, feel free to email me. Everything will be up on the website fairly soon, within a week probably. And thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
I'm one who's going to stay on, just ask one question about evaluating the change. I mean, like tomorrow, I don't know if I'm going to